The river raged like a beast, but one man dove in anyway, risking everything to save a wild Mustang. What he didn't know was the herd was watching. And when they finally stepped in the shadows, what they did next would leave him and you absolutely breathless. The storm had come down from the mountains without warning, a wall of black clouds rolling over the canyon like a curse. By the time Ethan Hart saw from his cabin window, the sky had already split open. Rain fell in sheets so thick it blurred the line between earth and heaven. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the teeth in his skull, and the air smelled of wet dirt and raw electricity. He should have stayed inside. That's what any sane man would do. But Ethan had never been known for caution. Not when he was 16 and rode bareback on a half-broke colt to impress a girl. Not when he was 23 and tried to ford the San Juan River in spring flood with nothing but a swayback mare and a bottle of whiskey. And certainly not now, though he was older and should have learned better. He tugged on his oilskin coat and stepped into the downpour, boots sinking deep into the mud. The wind whipped his face, cold and sharp as a slap, but he barely felt it. His fences ran along the lower pasture, close to the river, and if the water rose enough, he'd lose half his posts and maybe his only shot at keeping the wild Mustangs out. They'd been ranging closer these past few weeks, lured by the scent of hay. Ethan squinted to the sheets of rain as he made his way down the slope, each step a battle against the sucking earth. The river was a churning brown monster now, swollen with runoff from hills. Branches and whole tree limbs hurtled past, spinning wildly in the current. The roar of it filled his ears, drowning out everything else. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was driftwood caught in the flood, but then it moved, legs kicking, head jerking against the water's pull. A horse. No, not just any horse. Even through the rain, he could see the curve of its neck, the powerful chestnut body fighting for every breath. A Mustang, young and lean, its wild eyes flashing white with terror. Damn it all, Ethan muttered. He looked upriver and saw the herd clustered on the far bank, their shapes dim and ghost-like in the storm. They paced and whinnied, calling out, but none dared step into flood. The chestnut had been caught somehow, cut off from the others and swept away. Ethan's boots skidded on the slick grass as he half ran, half fell toward the bank. The Mustang was being pulled fast, flailing in the water, its hooves striking out in panic. The river curved sharply ahead, where jagged rocks jutted like teeth. If the horse didn't get out before then, it wouldn't. His heart hammered as he fumbled at his belt for the coiled lariat. His fingers were stiff and clumsy with cold, the rope slick with rain. He tested the knot, cursed under his breath, and scanned for an anchor. There, a stout cottonwood leaning over the water, its roots gripping the earth like a clenched fist. Ethan looped the rope around the trunk and braced himself, feet digging into the mud. He swung the loose end overhead and through. The first cast fell short. He yanked it back, lungs burning, and tried again. This time the loop sailed wide and caught. The rope slapped across the Mustang's neck, and instinct took over. The horse twisted, thrashing harder, but the current was too strong. Easy. Ethan bellowed over the river's roar. Easy, boy, I got you. He planted his heels and pulled. The rope jerked taut, sending a jolt through his shoulders. His boots skidded. His knees slammed into the mud. The Mustang screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the storm. Its eyes rolled, nostrils flared, and for one terrible second Ethan thought it would break its own neck trying to get free. "Don't fight me," he growled, voice low, steady. "Let me help you." The words were nonsense of the horse, but something in his tone, or maybe sheer exhaustion, made it falter. Its thrashing slowed to desperate kicking. Ethan leaned back with all his strength, the muscles in his arms and legs burning. Inch by inch, the Mustang's hooves scraped closer to the bank. The current clawed at it, refusing to let go. His fingers slipped on the rope, raw skin tearing, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not when he saw the sharp rocks ahead. Not when the Mustang's life hung by a thread he was holding. With a final heave, Ethan wrenched the animal free of the water's grip. The Mustang stumbled forward, legs folding awkwardly under its weight as it collapsed onto solid ground. It lay there trembling, sides heaving, foam streaking its chestnut coat. Ethan dropped to his knees beside it, chest heaving. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, ran down his face in salty streams. His hands hovered over the animal's neck, unsure if he dared touch it. "You're all right," he said softly. "You're safe now." The Mustang flinched but didn't bolt. Its wild eyes darted to him, the white stark in the gloom. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, man and beast, two creatures equally soaked, equally tired, equally alive. A sound carried over the river then, faint but clear even through the storm. A whinny. Ethan's head snapped up. On the far bank, the herd stood like statues, their manes streaming with rain. A massive black stallion stepped forward, muscles shifting under his wet hide. His nostrils flared as he called again, the sound echoing across the canyon. Ethan's breath caught. He felt their eyes on him, dozens of them, watching, waiting. He realized then that this wasn't just about one horse. This was about all of them, and whatever happened next would not be his choice to make. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the air was still thick with the scent of wet earth and something wilder, musky and electric, like the storm had left a charge behind. Ethan kept one knee pressed in mud, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. The young Mustang's chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, its coat slick with water and streaked with grime. A thin cut on its flank wept crimson, and Ethan's first instinct was to tear his shirt and bind it. But he didn't move. The horse was watching him, not like a cow or a workhorse would, blank and dim and accepting. No, this gaze was sharp, alive. Suspicion and fear wore in those dark eyes, but there was something else too, something Ethan couldn't name. He exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to loosen. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, low and rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 days, unless you count the fire or the wind. Maybe he was losing his edge. Or maybe he'd been too long alone in this empty canyon, with only the memories he couldn't outrun. The Mustang flicked an ear, its nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. Ethan stayed still. He knew better than to push. A scared animal was like a loaded gun. One wrong move and it could explode. Beyond the river, the herd shifted. Their shapes were clearer now in the soft gray light of early morning. Dozens of them. Mares and foals huddled close, a few young studs hanging back at the edges. And at their center, the black stallion stood like a sentinel. His mane hung heavy with rain, clinging to the curve of his neck. Every part of him radiated raw power, the kind that didn't need to charge to make its presence known. Ethan's mouth went dry. He'd seen plenty of wild horses before. Out here, the government paid people good money to round them up, thin their numbers, break them to saddle, or send them off in trucks to God knew where. He'd never taken one for himself. Too much spirit in them, too much fire in their blood. But none of that explained what he felt now, staring across the water into the eyes of that stallion. The black tossed his head, snorting, and Ethan swore he felt in his chest like the aftershock of thunder. The rescued Mustang turned at the sound, ears pricking. It tried to rise, hooves scrabbling in the mud. Ethan's hand shot out without thinking. "Whoa! Easy there," he said, his fingers grazing the slick hide. The Mustang froze under his touch. Ethan could feel the tremor in its muscles, the thrum of life just beneath skin and hair. Its heartbeat was fast, fluttering like a trapped bird's. And then, in a rush, it heaved itself upright. Mud sloughed from its legs as it stood, swaying for a moment before finding its balance. The cut on its flank was worse than he thought, but it didn't seem to care. Its head lifted, ears swiveling toward the herd. "That's it," Ethan murmured. "Go on. They're waiting for you." The Mustang took a tentative step forward, favoring its left hind leg. Ethan didn't move, didn't even breathe as it limped past him. The rope he'd used to pull it out of the river trailed in the mud like a forgotten tether. When the Mustang reached the water's edge, it stopped. Rain pattered softly around them, the only sound now that the storm's fury had spent itself. The chestnut tossed its head once, then let out a sharp, high whinny. The reply was immediate. A chorus of calls rose from across the river, filling the canyon with their wild voices. The herd pressed closer to the bank. The black stallion took 2 steps into the shallows, water churning around his fetlocks. Ethan's gut clenched. It was like watching a conversation in a language he didn't speak. The Mustang flicked its ears, shifted its weight. The stallion's tail lashed. Then, without warning, he plunged deeper into the river. Ethan startled. The current wasn't strong now, but it still ran high and fast. The stallion's muscles bunched and surged as he pushed through the water, nostrils flaring with effort. When he reached the opposite bank, he clambered up, dripping and magnificent. Behind him, the rest of the herd hesitated. And then, one by one, they stepped forward. Ethan could hardly believe it. They weren't fleeing. They weren't panicked. They were coming. Mares with foals tight at their sides. Yearlings still awkward on their long legs. Gray muzzles and cold dark eyes all fixed on him as they picked their way across the shallows. The black stallion hung back, letting them pass, but his gaze never wavered from Ethan. It felt like standing in the path of a gathering storm. Ethan swallowed hard. His body screamed at him to retreat, to put space between himself and the untamed tide of hooves and muscle and spirit bearing down on him. But he stayed. His boots were sunk to the ankles in mud. His hands were empty, except for the torn coil of rope he hadn't realized he was still holding. When the first mare reached the bank, she shook herself, water flying in arcs. She looked at Ethan as she stepped onto solid ground, her ears pricked and her nostrils flaring. The others followed. Ethan's breath came shallow and fast. He felt small in a way he hadn't since he was a boy, looking up at the canyon walls and realizing how little he mattered in the grand scheme of things. The chestnut Mustang limped forward to meet its kin, a dapple gray mare. Its mother, maybe, pushed her muzzle against its neck, nickering low. Ethan couldn't look away. And then the black stallion moved. He came slowly this time, each step deliberate, hooves striking wet earth with a sound like a heartbeat. His mane clung to his neck in dark ropes, eyes glinting under the leaden sky. Ethan didn't dare move. The stallion stopped just a few feet away, his head high, nostrils wide. The rain had eased to a mist now, soft and cold against Ethan's face. For a moment, nothing in the world existed except the two of them, man-beast, and whatever strange current passed between. The stallion snorted, a deep rumble that vibrated in Ethan's bones. He lowered his massive head, inch by inch, until his breath ghosted across Ethan's hands. Ethan let the rope slip from his fingers. He didn't need it anymore. The stallion's eyes flicked down, then back up. A test. A question. Ethan's chest ached with the force of his own heartbeat. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but no words came. Slowly, impossibly, the stallion took one more step and pressed his muzzle lightly, deliberately, against Ethan's chest. Ethan's breath caught. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was something else entirely. Before he could even process it, the stallion pulled back. He tossed his head once and turned, his powerful body brushing close enough that Ethan could feel the heat radiating off him. The rest of the herd began to move again, their hooves whispering in the wet grass. But the black stallion lingered a moment longer, looking back over his shoulder with eyes so deep and dark Ethan felt like he could drown in them. Then, with a flick of his tail, he melted into the mist. Ethan stood rooted in place, the echo of that touch still burning on his chest. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew, down to the marrow of his bones, that he would never forget it. The mist curled low over the canyon floor, soft as breath and cold enough to seep into Ethan's bones. He didn't know how long he'd stood there, watching the black stallion disappear with his herd into the cottonwoods. It could have been minutes or hours. Time had dissolved in the wake of that impossible moment when the beast's muzzle pressed against his chest. The heat of it lingered like a brand. Ethan dragged in a shaky breath and let his eyes close. He could still hear the river gurgling beside him, calmer now, but no less treacherous. His hands flexed unconsciously, fingers stiff with mud and blood where the rope had bitten into them. Every muscle ached from the fight to save the chestnut Mustang, yet something deep inside him hummed with strange, restless energy. It had been years since he felt like this. Alive, needed. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound from the tree-lean, hooves scuffing damp earth. A low nicker. Ethan opened his eyes. Through the gray veil, movement stirred. The herd wasn't gone. Shapes resolved in the murk, manes rippling, legs shifting in the underbrush. They hadn't fled. They were watching. His pulse quickened. The black stallion stood apart, motionless as stone, his dark eyes fixed on Ethan. He should leave. This wasn't his world. These were wild things, untamable, and he'd done his part. The chestnut was safe. His duty was over. But his boots stayed planted. A part of him, fierce and unreasoning, wanted to step forward instead, to see how close he could get before the spell broke. It was madness. Yet wasn't it the same madness that had driven him into the river to save a horse he didn't own, one that would never wear a bridle or pull a plow? Ethan's breath steamed in the cold air as he shifted his weight. The mare nearest the edge of the herd flicked her ears forward, her tail twitching. The chestnut was beside her now, leaning into her shoulder like a child seeking comfort. Its wounded leg bore weight unevenly, but it stood tall, eyes steady on him. "Yeah," Ethan whispered, "I see you." The memory of another river crept up on him then, unbidden. Years ago, standing on a different muddy bank, a boy had gone under. His partner, Sam Whitlow, face white with terror as he flailed in water far deeper and stronger than they'd thought. Ethan had been faster back then, stronger, but not fast enough, not strong enough. The current had pulled Sam away, and when Ethan dragged him out downstream, his friend's chest hadn't risen again. The image clung to him like a burr. "You can't save 'em all," old ranch hands had said, trying to soften the edges of blame. But they didn't know how it felt to stand by helpless while life slipped through your fingers. This time was different. This time he hadn't failed. The thought steadied him. He took one careful step toward the trees. The black stallion's ears twitched. His massive body shifted slightly, a ripple of muscle under wet hide. Ethan stopped. "I ain't here to hurt you," he murmured. His throat tightened. "I just want to see you again." The stallion blew out a deep breath, steam curling from his nostrils. Ethan's boots made a sucking sound as he took another step. Then another. He moved slow, deliberate, keeping his hands low and open. The air felt heavier with every foot of ground he closed. At 5 paces, the black's head dipped a fraction. A signal? A warning? Ethan froze. The herd didn't scatter. They stood calm but alert, their bodies forming a loose circle around the chestnut Mustang, as if shielding the younger horse from a world. Ethan's gaze softened. The chestnut flicked its ears and took a step forward. The herd murmured low in their throats, but didn't block it. One more step, and the chestnut was standing only a yard away. Rain dripped from its mane, the cut on its flank a dark streak against a gleaming coat. Ethan crouched slowly, his knees popping in protest. "Hey there, fella," he said softly. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" The Mustang stretched out its neck, nostrils flaring as it drew in his scent. Ethan didn't move. He barely breathed. When the horse's muzzle brushed his fingers, his chest constricted. It wasn't just a touch. It was the trust. Fragile as spun glass and no less precious. Behind the chestnut, the black stallion stomped a hoof, sending a splash of mud flying. His head tossed, mane whipping. The tension surged like a crack of lightning. Ethan forced himself to pull his hand back. "I know," he said, voice low. "He's yours." The stallion's muscles coiled tight, but he didn't charge. Instead, with slow, deliberate steps, he came forward. The herd parted to let him through, their dark eyes following his every move. Ethan's heartbeat drummed so loud it filled his ears. He wanted to stand, to run, to do anything but kneel vulnerable before this mountain of horseflesh and raw will. But he didn't. The stallion stopped close enough Ethan could see the fine tremor in his wet whiskers, the scars crisscrossing his chest. A leader's life wasn't easy, not in the wild. Ethan looked into those eyes, black as river stone, and saw no malice there, only watchfulness. "I didn't mean to take him," Ethan said. "I just pulled him out of the water. He's yours now." The stallion's nostrils flared. He lowered his massive head until Ethan could feel the warmth of his breath on his cheek. And then, impossibly, the stallion pressed his forehead lightly against Ethan's shoulder. The world stilled. Ethan's vision blurred. The stallion's breath smelled of grass and rain, of life untethered. He didn't move, didn't dare disturb the fragile peace of that moment. When the stallion pulled back, Ethan felt the absence like a cold wind. The black turned with a flick of his tail, walking back into the herd. The chestnut Mustang lingered a moment longer, eyes locked on Ethan's. Before following, Ethan stayed crouched long after they'd melted into the trees. His heart felt too big for his chest. The herd's acceptance, or was it forgiveness, had carved something open inside him, something he hadn't known was still there. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew one thing. He wasn't the same man who'd stepped out into the storm this morning, and he never would be again. The canyon was quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels earned after a storm. A soft wind rustled the cottonwoods, carrying a faint scent of wet earth and crushed grass. Ethan stood alone on the muddy bank, staring at the place where the herd had disappeared into the trees. The air felt heavier somehow, as if their presence still lingered, invisible but undeniable. His shirt clung to his back, cold and damp. His hands were raw from the rope, every scrape and bruise pulsing with dull heat. Yet he felt no pain, only an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his body. The way the black stallion had pressed his forehead to Ethan's shoulder replayed in his mind like a memory he didn't want to let go. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been fear. It was something else. A choice. Ethan crouched and picked up the rope from the mud, turning it over in his palms. The fibers were frayed, stained dark from river water and blood. It was just a tool, but now it felt like a tether to something much larger than himself. For years he kept his world small, fences and firewood and silence. He'd told himself that was enough. But standing here, watching wild horses slip back into the forest, he realized how empty that life had been. A soft sound caught his ear. His head jerked up, heart thudding. At the edge of the trees, a shape stood half hidden in the mist. The chestnut Mustang. Its ears were pricked forward, dark eyes fixed on him. Ethan froze, afraid even to breathe. He thought the young horse might turn and vanish like the rest, but it didn't. It stepped out of the shadows, hooves silent on the damp earth. Slowly, carefully, it limped closer. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The horse stopped a few feet away, nostrils flaring as it took in his scent. Its gaze was sharp and searching, as though trying to memorize every line of his face. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan whispered hoarsely. "They're waiting for you." The chestnut flicked its ears, but didn't move. Ethan's hand hovered in the air. He wanted to reach out, to feel that warm coat beneath his fingers one last time, but he held back. Some bonds weren't meant to be tied down. After what felt like an eternity, the Mustang lowered its head and pawed at the mud. A soft nicker rumbled from its throat. Then, with a flick of its tail, it turned and walked back toward the trees. Ethan watched it go, his breath catching when it paused at the edge of the herd. The black stallion was waiting there, standing like a sentinel in the pale light. The younger horse touched muzzles with him briefly, then melted into the mass of shifting bodies. And just like that, they were gone. Ethan stood for a long time, staring at the empty tree line. His fingers curled tightly around the rope. The ache in his chest swelled, but it wasn't the kind of ache that left a man hollow. It was the kind that made room for something new. He'd come here today thinking he was alone in the world. Now he wasn't so sure. When his legs finally moved, it was with a slowness born of exhaustion and wonder. The sun had broken through clouds, and the river shimmered in its light. The water's roar had softened to a gentle murmur, like the canyon itself had let out a long-held breath. Ethan walked up the slope toward his cabin, boots squelching in the mud. Each step felt heavier than the last, but there was a strange peace in that weight. As he crested the hill, he turned back one last time. There was no sign of the herd, no flash of a mane or the thunder of hooves. Only silence and the sway of trees in the breeze. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were out there, watching. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, small and unsteady but real. "Thank you," he said softly, though there was no one to hear. He let the words drift into the canyon like a promise. Then he turned and walked on, the coil of rope swinging gently in his hand, and the sound of distant hoofbeats echoing faintly in his memory like a heartbeat that would never leave him.